Have you ever seen someone love so deeply, so hopelessly, that they forgot who they were? Tell me in the comments, have you ever watched a person lose themselves for love? I'd like to hear your stories. And if you're new here, welcome to Autumn Confessions. This is a place where we speak from the heart, no matter how heavy the truth. Hit the like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you won't miss the next chapter of this story. Because today we begin something I've held inside for over 50 years. My name is Walter. I'm 75. And what I'm about to tell you isn't a fairy tale. It's a memory. One that starts in a place where the wind always carried secrets, a dusty corner of West Texas called Copper Bend. My father's name was Raymond. A man who believed in work, in routine, in doing right. He fixed trucks, changed oil, and came home every night with grease on his shirt and love in his eyes. And then there was my mother. Delilah. If Raymond was the ground, she was lightning. Red hair, green eyes, and a smile that could freeze your heart and melt it again in the same breath. Nobody knew where she came from, exactly. Some said Oklahoma. Others whispered she'd been married before. Nobody knew for sure, and those who asked never got a straight answer. My father didn't care. He saw her once at the diner where she waitressed for 2 weeks and that was it. He was gone. Hooked. Enchanted. Doomed. They married within a month. I was born not long after. Growing up, I didn't have to read fairy tales, I lived one. Except in ours, the princess didn't save the prince. She drained him. Dad worshipped her. And she knew it. She didn't cook. She didn't clean. She didn't work after she moved in with him. She spent her days smoking menthols and painting her nails on the porch swing. Nights? Dressed to the nines and out with friends. My father never asked questions. Or maybe he did once and learned better. I remember once, he came home early with a gift, a watch she'd once admired in a shop window. I watched him give it to her like a kid bringing home a crayon drawing. She opened the box, blinked once, and said, "I thought it would be bigger." Then she walked away. And Dad? He just smiled like a man who'd been blessed. Like her disappointment meant he'd get to try again. I was maybe 6 or 7 when I realized, love, the way my father loved, could make a man invisible, even to himself. And back then, I didn't know the half of it. By the time I was 10, I knew how to read people better than most adults. I had to. In our house, words weren't what mattered, tones were. Silences. What wasn't said. Delilah ruled that house like a queen with no mercy. Every day was a test, though none of us knew the rules. If Dad brought home the wrong brand of cigarettes, there'd be 3 days of cold shoulders. If I laughed too loudly at the dinner table, she'd stare at me like I'd spat on the carpet. But she never yelled. No, Delilah didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Her disappointment was louder than any scream. And yet, my father adored her. Worshipped her. If she was the storm, he was the man building a shelter for her every single day, knowing she'd knock it down just to see if he'd do it again. People in town saw her and smiled, polite. She was beautiful, mesmerizing, really, and in a place like Copper Bend, that was enough. They whispered, though. Oh, they whispered. "She's trouble," I heard Mrs. Lott say to her husband once at the grocery. "That woman's got a past." I didn't know what kind of past she meant, but it sounded like the kind you can't outrun. Dad never defended her. He didn't need to. His loyalty was a fortress. If the world turned against her, I think he would have just built a smaller world, just for her. And then there was me. Quiet little Walter. I stayed out of the way. Did my chores. Read books. Tried to disappear when the air got too tight. Which was often. Delilah didn't like mess. Didn't like noise. Didn't like being reminded she had a son. Unless, of course, someone important came to visit, then I became her prop. Her sweet boy. She'd tousle my hair and smile like we were the perfect family from a magazine. And I played along. I learned early that survival in our house meant pretending. Pretending everything was fine. Pretending I didn't notice how tired Dad looked, how pale he got by the end of the week. Pretending I didn't hear the phone ring late at night, or the strange perfume on her clothes. I once asked him, I must have been 11, Dad, do you think Mom loves you? He looked at me, quiet for a long time. Then said something I never forgot. She lets me stay. That was all. And in that moment, I understood something that haunts me to this day: some people don't measure love by joy, they measure it by permission. There's a sound I'll never forget. The sound of my father's boots on the porch steps. 3 slow, dragging thuds. Always at 6:45 p.m. Every night. Like clockwork. That sound meant he was home. It also meant I had about 30 seconds to make sure the living room was clean, the ashtray emptied, and Mom's slippers were where she liked them, right under the armchair by the window. Because if everything wasn't just so, the evening would begin with a sigh. Her sigh. And once Delilah sighed, it didn't stop. She could carry that disappointment for hours like it was fine china. One night, I remember Dad came home later than usual. His shirt was stained, there was a cut on his hand. He looked rough, more tired than usual. He stepped inside, smiled at her, and said, "Sorry, Hon, had to tow a car out of a ditch over by Fairgrove." Delilah didn't even turn around. She just said, "I told you I wanted fried chicken tonight. You promised." And that was it. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Did you eat?" Just disappointment, like an iron across the room. He didn't argue. He just got back in the truck and drove 20 minutes into town to fetch that damn chicken. I watched all this from the hallway. Silent. Still. And something in me, some small, warm, boyish part, started to shrivel. I knew then what it meant to be invisible. Not just to strangers. To your own mother. At school, I didn't talk much. I wasn't bullied, exactly, I was too quiet for that, but I also wasn't really there. Teachers liked me. I was polite, neat, always turned in my work. But no one ever invited me over. No one asked what I thought or how I felt. I lived 2 lives. The one in public, tidy and silent, and the one at home, which felt like waiting for a storm that never really ended. But every boy needs something to cling to. For me, it was music. I found an old transistor radio in the garage one afternoon, buried under a pile of rusted tools. I cleaned it up, replaced the batteries, and from that day on, I listened. Late at night, under the covers, soft and low. Blues from Memphis. Country from Amarillo. Jazz, once, from some station out of New Orleans that only came through during thunderstorms. I don't know how to explain it, but those voices, those sad, scratchy songs, felt like they knew me. Like someone out there understood what it was to feel small, and tired, and hopeful all at once. And then one night, around midnight, I heard something else. Not from the radio. From the kitchen. Whispers. My mother's voice. And a man's. Not Dad's. And that night, everything I thought I understood shifted. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining it. The kitchen light was off. The house was quiet, except for the occasional hum of the fridge and the ticking clock in the hallway. But the voices were there. Low. Urgent. I crept down the hallway in my socks, careful to avoid the squeaky floorboard near the coat rack. I stopped just short of the kitchen door, my back to the wall. I heard my mother's voice first. "No, not tonight. He's still awake." A man answered. His voice was rougher, older. "You said we had time. I came all this way. Then silence. Then a whisper. I can't do this if he finds out. My father? I wanted to step forward. To push the door open. To see. But I couldn't move. My legs felt like stone. Then footsteps, and the sound of the back door closing softly. When I finally peeked in, the kitchen was empty. Just the smell of cigarette smoke and something else, cologne. Not my father's. I crept back to my room, heart pounding in my ears. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and tried to tell myself it was nothing. But I knew. Deep down, I knew. Delilah wasn't just cold. She wasn't just vain. She was unfaithful. The next morning, everything was as usual. She was in her robe, painting her nails. Dad had already gone to work. The kitchen was clean. The coffee smelled strong. Morning, she said casually, not looking up. I nodded and sat down, staring at the toast on my plate like it might tell me what to do. How do you tell your father that the woman he loves is lying to him? Especially when you're 12. Especially when she's your mother. I didn't say a word. And I didn't have to. Because 2 weeks later, it all came crashing down on its own. It was a Sunday. We'd just gotten home from church, or rather, Dad and I had. Mom had stayed behind, said she wasn't feeling well. The front door was unlocked. That was the first sign. The second was the coat on the hallway floor. A man's coat. Dad picked it up slowly, staring at it like it was a snake. And then, from upstairs, a voice. Her voice. Laughter. Soft. Intimate. My father didn't speak. Didn't shout. He just looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw something in his eyes I didn't recognize. Not anger. Not even betrayal. Just emptiness. Then he handed me the car keys. Go wait outside, he said. Quiet. Steady. I obeyed. I sat in the truck for what felt like forever, gripping the keys so tightly they left marks in my palm. And then, the sound of footsteps. Only one pair. The truck door creaked when he opened it. My father slid behind the wheel slowly, like his bones had turned to lead. He didn't look at me. Didn't speak. We drove for a while in silence, past the feed store, past the high school football field, past the edges of Copper Bend where the road begins to forget it's connected to anything. Finally, he pulled over by an old picnic area near the dried-up riverbed. Killed the engine. Just sat there. I waited. The only sound was the ticking of the cooling engine and birds somewhere in the trees. I looked at him. His hands rested on the steering wheel, still, like they'd forgotten how to move. Then he said, "You ever feel like you've been living someone else's life?" I didn't answer. I was 13, maybe. I didn't know what to say. He turned to me then. Not angry. Just hollow. I gave everything to her, he said. Everything. And it still wasn't enough. I wanted to say something. Anything. But all I could do was stare at the tears sliding down his cheek, the first I'd ever seen from him. She told me once that love meant never asking questions, he continued. I believed her. He let out a breath that sounded more like defeat than relief. I was a fool. That word, fool, hit harder than a slap. We sat there for a long time. Maybe an hour. Then, without another word, he started the engine, turned the truck around, and drove us home. Delilah was gone when we got there. So was her suitcase. She didn't leave a note. Didn't leave a forwarding address. Just vanished. For a week, Dad didn't speak much. He went to work. Came home. Slept in the armchair. The house felt like it was holding its breath. And then, one morning, he was just different. He made breakfast. Washed dishes. Repainted the porch swing. Like something inside him had clicked back into place. He even smiled. I didn't understand it. Not then. How do you smile after being abandoned? But now I think I know. It wasn't joy. It was release. Sometimes what breaks you also sets you free. After she left, life didn't go back to normal. It became something new. The silence in the house changed. It wasn't tense anymore. It was soft. Peaceful. Like the air had been cleared. Dad and I started talking more, not much, just little things at first. What he wanted for dinner. How my day at school went. Whether the truck was making a new noise or the same old one. He stopped sleeping in the chair. Went back to his bed. One Saturday morning, I found him out in the backyard, trimming the hedge, humming. I stood there watching him, a rake in my hand, not sure what I was seeing. "You gonna help or just admire my technique?" he called, grinning. That was new, too, the grin. We worked side by side that morning, and for the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long while. Safety. It didn't last, of course. Nothing that pure ever does. But we had that window. That small stretch of time when everything felt almost right. Delilah didn't come back. But her shadow stuck around. Letters started arriving. Postmarks from different cities, Tulsa, Phoenix, Albuquerque. They weren't addressed to me. They weren't even always signed. But I knew it was her. My father never opened them. Just stacked them in the drawer beside his bed. Once, I asked him why. He looked at me with a calm I didn't recognize and said, "Because I already know what they say." And that was that. Years passed. I grew taller, quieter, older. He started teaching me how to fix things, carburetors, alternators, little engines. Said a man should know how to rebuild what's broken. He never said, "in case something falls apart again." But I knew. By the time I was 15, I could change a timing belt in 30 minutes flat. I could also sense a lie before someone finished the sentence. Both skills came in handy. Then came the phone call. It was a Thursday. Late spring. The phone rang during dinner. Dad answered. Said nothing for a long time. Then, softly, "I see." He hung up. I asked who it was. "She's sick," he said. No name. He didn't have to say it. Delilah. He didn't say much more that night. Just went out to the porch, lit a cigarette, the first I'd seen him smoke in years, and stared out into the yard like it might answer questions for him. I watched from the screen door. The next morning, he was up early. Made breakfast. Cleaned the kitchen. Called in sick to work, which he hadn't done in over a decade. By noon, the truck was packed. 2 shirts, a shaving kit, a tin of old photographs. He didn't ask if I wanted to come. Didn't say I should stay, either. Just looked at me and said, "You'll be all right for a couple days." I nodded. He hesitated. Then pulled me into the first real hug I could remember. "Be good, Walt." Then he drove away. I watched the dust trail vanish down the road, wondering if this was the last time I'd see him. He was gone 3 days. I fed myself, did the chores, kept the house standing. But inside, I was twisting. Imagining every scenario, hospital beds, whispered apologies, dramatic farewells. I didn't know what I wanted more, for him to come back whole, or not come back at all. On the 4th day, the truck returned. He got out slower than usual. Looked tired, worn. But not broken. I ran to him. "Well?" I asked. He sat on the porch steps and rubbed his hands together, as if the story was caught in his palms. "She's dying," he said finally. "Liver. Doctor says maybe a few months." I sat beside him, knees pulled up to my chest. She asked me to stay. He paused. I didn't. I looked up. Surprised. I sat with her a while, he said. She cried. Apologized. Said she made mistakes. He picked at the porch rail. Then she asked me if I still loved her. I was afraid to ask. But I did anyway. And? He looked out toward the horizon, where the sky was starting to shift into orange. I told her I used to, he said. But I don't miss who I used to be. And that, somehow, felt like the bravest thing I'd ever heard. After that, something changed in him, not all at once, but gradually, like ice melting into a slow stream. He started sleeping through the night. Whistled sometimes while shaving. Painted the kitchen cabinets one weekend just because they looked tired. And he began writing. Every night, after dinner, he'd sit at the kitchen table with a notebook and pen. No fanfare. Just quiet scribbling under the glow of the overhead light. At first, I thought it was bills, or repairs, or maybe a letter he never intended to send. But curiosity got the better of me. One afternoon, while he was at the hardware store, I opened the notebook. It wasn't what I expected. Pages and pages of stories. Memories. Little moments, some I remembered, some I didn't. His first car. The time he fell off the roof and Delilah laughed instead of helping. The way I used to hum when I did my math homework. None of it was angry. None bitter. Just, real. He was writing his life back into his own hands. I closed the notebook gently and never touched it again. But from that day on, I looked at him differently. Not just as my father. But as a man who'd survived something quietly. A man who'd rebuilt himself, not loudly, not dramatically, but piece by piece, with patience and grace. The seasons passed. I finished high school. He came to graduation in a clean shirt and a tie I'd never seen before. Sat in the front row. Cried a little. We never talked about Delilah again. And I stopped wondering if she'd write or call or suddenly reappear in the driveway one rainy evening. That chapter was closed. Not with a slam. But with a sigh. Years later, when I went off to college, he packed me sandwiches and a thermos of coffee. Told me to work hard and call home. He hugged me tight and said, "Make your own story, son." And I did. But a part of mine, the strongest part, was built on his. Time, as it does, kept moving. I graduated college, found work 2 towns over, and married a woman who taught 2nd grade and believed that forgiveness was more important than being right. Her laugh was loud, honest. Her hands always smelled like soap and pencil shavings. I loved her quietly, the way my father taught me love ought to be, steady, not flashy. Faithful. Dad visited us once a month without fail. Always driving the same old truck, always bringing something, a sack of tools, a newspaper clipping, an extra pie from the diner run by Miss Lillian, who still winked at him after all those years. He never came empty-handed, not because we needed anything, but because giving was his way of speaking. My wife adored him. She said he reminded her of a tree, weathered, solid, a little scarred, but still standing, still giving shade. And our daughter, well, she was his undoing. He held her like she was spun from glass. Called her, Sunbeam. Told her stories that I thought he'd forgotten. How to fix a leaky faucet. How to catch frogs without getting wet. How love, when true, never asks you to shrink. She used to curl up on his lap with her favorite blanket and say, "Tell me one more, Grandpa." And he always did. Those were good years. Gentle ones. They moved quietly, like early snow, soft, but sure. But time doesn't ask permission. It just takes. That fall, the one when the leaves turned too quickly and the wind bit early, Dad didn't show up for his usual visit. No call. No message. Just silence. I waited a day, then another. On the third day, I drove back to Copper Bend, hands tight on the wheel the whole way. His house looked the same. Porch light on. Mail neatly stacked. Truck parked in its usual spot. But the moment I stepped inside, I knew. He was in the armchair by the window, his old notebook open in his lap. His glasses had slid down a little. His chest didn't rise. He looked like he was sleeping. I didn't cry at first. Just sat beside him and listened to the silence we'd shared so many evenings. Later, I found the final page of the notebook. He'd written in pencil, as always. Just one line. Everything I couldn't fix, I forgave. I must have read it 100 times that week. Trying to find some deeper meaning, some message he meant for me alone. But maybe it was just that simple. Maybe forgiveness is the last tool a man has when time runs out. Maybe that's how you leave, light. We buried him under the old elm at the edge of the Copper Bend Cemetery. It was a small service. Just me, my wife, our daughter, and a few folks who'd known him back when he still fixed cars and kept the world from falling apart with nothing but a wrench and quiet strength. No big speeches. No fancy music. Just the wind in the branches and the kind of silence he would have appreciated, steady, respectful, enough space for thoughts to breathe. After the service, I stood there a while longer. My daughter held my hand. She was too young to understand what death truly meant, but old enough to ask, "Will Grandpa still tell me stories?" I knelt down and looked her in the eyes. "He already has," I said. "Every one of them's inside you now. You just have to remember." That night, back home, I opened his notebook again. I copied the stories, one by one, into a new journal. Added memories of my own. Labeled it, "For her, when she's ready." Because that's what he left me, in the end. Not money. Not land. Not regrets. But a story. A path paved with both sorrow and strength. A blueprint for becoming a man who doesn't flinch at silence. Who knows when to hold on, and when to let go. Who understands that sometimes, survival isn't about escaping pain, it's about standing inside it, quietly, until it softens. Now, I'm 75. And sometimes, late at night, I hear echoes of his boots in my own steps. I sit on the porch with a pen in hand and the wind brushing past like an old friend. My daughter has children of her own now. They call me Pop. And when they climb into my lap and ask, "Tell us a story," I smile. Because I have them. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. And each one begins the same way. There once was a man, who loved a woman more than himself. And learned, finally, how to love the rest of the world, too. Life has a way of leaving stories in our bones, even if we never write them down. Some folks live through storms and never say a word. Others rebuild quietly, one small kindness at a time. And some, like my father, teach us everything not by preaching, but by simply standing still when it matters most. If you've come this far with me, thank you. That means something. It means maybe you, too, have known a silence that said more than words. Maybe you've loved someone who didn't know how to stay. Or maybe you've been that person, trying to come back from the wreckage. Now I'd love to hear from you. Did this story remind you of someone in your life? A parent, a partner, maybe even yourself? What do you think it means to forgive what can't be fixed? Leave a comment. Let's sit a while together, you, me, and the quiet between us. There's plenty of room on this porch.